Buying a Tommy Oliver. Alright y'all, what's good YouTube? I am, of course, your host Petit Train, and for today's video, I've created a tier list where I'm going to rank every classic TOMY Thomas and Friends model. This list is ranked from ultra rare to common tier. Common, being the bottom tier, represents models which are extremely easy to come across and are always found in people's large lots or collections. On the other hand, ultra rare tier consists of characters whose models are almost always extinct, and when they do pop up online, they're either sold out super fast or they sit at insane prices. With all that being said, let's get straight into it. Take it away, segue narrator.
Thomas.
Thank you, Unnamed Narrator. Thomas was, of course, the first ever Tommy model created, and realistically, it's probably the most common. It makes sense, as he's featured in by far and away the most sets, and he's also the most popular engine. Thomas finds himself in the common tier. No shockers here.
Edward.
If you couldn't tell, we're going in numerical order, so Edward is up next. Honestly, he's rarer than you'd expect. He doesn't really feature in any sets, and that's huge in making an engine rare. You would think he's more common than he is, but there really aren't a lot of him up. Along with him not being one of the most popular engines, Edward is our first engine in the hard to find tier.
Henry.
The number 3 engine, Henry, is not only a personal favorite of mine, but also of the entire fan bases. Because of this, he's a very much sought after item. However, Henry is definitely findable. He's featured in many sets, and you won't be surprised to find him sat in a large lot of Tommy toys. Despite this, I can't quite describe Henry as quote-unquote common, so he'll find himself just above it, in the uncommon tier.
Gordon.
One of the models I personally want most right now, Gordon, is a character I've been looking for a while. I'm pretty sure I have one coming in the mail fairly soon, but as of now, I don't own one. I really debated putting him in between uncommon and hard to find, and I think he just misses out on hard to find. He's very much sought after, and I think there are just enough admittedly expensive listings online of him to get him out of hard to find. Gordon is in uncommon.
James.
James is a different story, however. There are tons of listings of him online, and he's certainly the most common tender engine. As a part of the classic series Big 3, Tommy made a ton of James models. He was featured in a fair few amount of sets, and is one of the most sought after models due to the engine's popularity. James pretty comfortably finds himself in the common tier.
Percy.
Similar to James, Percy is one of the most popular engines, and therefore Tommy made a bunch of his models. As one of the main characters of the show, Percy was the star of many of his own sets back in the day, and he's extremely easy to find online. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, Percy, as well as James, is in common.
Toby.
Toby the Trem Engine is another model who I think is quite close between two tiers. On one hand, Toby doesn't really feature in many sets of his own. Aside from the regular 3-pack with Henrietta, Toby doesn't get the stardom that Percy or James got. However, he definitely was bought by a ton of people. He's extremely unique and certainly loved by Thomas fans. Another one of those models you almost always find in people's old collections. I consider putting him in uncommon, but I think he just misses it out, making him the third straight common tier engine.
Duck.
The trend of common tier engines won't continue here though, as Duck is next up. A fan favorite, he's an engine that most collectors are keen on acquiring, and he isn't super hard to get. Duck has always been loved, even back in the day, so there are a ton of his models circulating the market. For these reasons, Duck sits in the uncommon tier.
Donald.
Now, we're out of the main cast, we're going to get into some more niche engines who aren't necessarily the biggest of names. The first of the Scottish twins, Donald, is definitely the more common of the two. Donald was featured in a couple of sets, but he was never the most popular of engines. He's quite beloved nowadays though, and although you won't find him sitting in a large lot from someone's childhood, he did in fact get a 3-pack, and you can definitely find him online. Donald is our second hard to find engine.
Douglas.
Douglas, however, is a different story. First off, to my knowledge, Douglas never received any US release. There are images of a Tommy branded Douglas package online, but I'm fairly sure that the packaging you're looking at now was Australian only. The only other way to get a Tommy Douglas was from a super rare 1999 snowplow set, only released in Japan, that featured both Donald and Douglas. That set is incredibly rare. And when you do find a Douglas online, it's usually way overpriced. Nowadays, Douglas is very much sought after. There are only 2 extremely rare and limited periods to get Douglas back in the day. Both of them were outside of the US. Because of this, he's now extremely expensive. Douglas, my friends, comfortably finds himself in the ultra rare tier. I don't really see any way you could argue against it.
Stepney.
Stepney is our next entry, and although not nearly as rare as Douglas, he's still quite uncommon. When browsing for Stepney online, I ran into a problem that's pretty common when searching for these fairly niche 2-decade-old toys. This doesn't just apply for Stepney, but for a lot of these less common engines. I want to get sidetracked a little bit and talk about how sellers title their products on eBay specifically. You guys probably already know the drill, but it's all too common to look for an engine, such as Stepney, and see a title that includes both Trackmaster and Tomy. Then you look at the image and see that it quite simply isn't a Tomy engine, it's a Trackmaster. Sellers do this to artificially ramp up the value of their engines because Tomy models are far more desirable than Trackmaster ones. These eBay sellers are able to get away with throwing in the keyword Tomy onto their Trackmaster listings because for the first couple of years of Trackmaster, Tomy continued to produce their toys before handing off production to Trackmaster. This is why early Trackmaster models look so similar to Tomy ones. You might be asking yourself, what does Stepney have to do with this? There are tons of quote-unquote Trackmaster Tomy Stepneys online. While it might seem like Stepney is a quite common engine because of the volume of listings there are of him, when you do some digging into a lot of these listings, a vast majority of them are just early Trackmasters. Because of how he's pretty uncommon to find as an original Tomy engine, Stepney finds himself in the hard-to-find tier.
Up next is Oliver, and it's funny because my channel name is...
Immediately after reading the title and seeing the thumbnail, I imagine you guys are probably like, where's Oliver gonna go? He's probably the most infamous quote-unquote rare engine in the entire community, and I want to take this segment to debunk a few myths about Oliver that are perpetuated in this community. First off, Oliver is not a quote-unquote common engine. A sentiment that's prevalent in this community is that Oliver is both somehow expensive, but actually really common, and those eBay sellers are just overpricing him for their own gain. However, this simply is wrong. Now, Oliver was infamously never released in the United States or North America, which is Thomas's biggest market. This alone makes him extremely sought after, and currently he's a fan favorite, so his demand has never been higher. Now let me give you guys a little economics lesson. The two main drivers of a product's price are its supply and demand. There's a relatively small supply of Olivers in the market compared to every other engine, and for the Olivers that aren't in basements or owned by current collectors, the demand is very high. There is no cartel on Olivers by eBay sellers. They simply know that when considering his supply and demand, that's where he belongs price-wise. On the topic of his rarity though, I think we can safely put him in the rare tier. He definitely wasn't as limitedly released as Douglas, but he isn't as generally common as Donald or Edward. Some of you might call me wrong or say that I'm an idiot in the comments, but I disagree.
Diesel.
Back to a bit more of a common engine, we have the devious Diesel himself. A character that was featured in a bunch of sets back in the day. I always found it kind of funny how he was pulling a soda fuel and milk tanker. I mean, I guess it makes sense because someone had to pull them in their 3-packs and they didn't need more engines to just pull a basic troublesome truck, but still fun regardless. I honestly debated putting him in the common tier because of just how often he pops up in random lots and people's collections. However, I think he's just slightly above the likes of James or Percy, so on my list, he just barely sneaks into the uncommon tier.
Bill.
You know, I'm not sure what Tomy's issue was with twins back in the day. Bill is practically the same story as Douglas. He was only released in Japan for a long time, but did eventually get a US 2006 release with 2 small tracks. He was only available for a long time in Japan with a now ultra rare set featuring his twin Ben and Cranky. Besides that set and the really short-lived single release, that was the only way to get him. I think he's a tad bit more common than Douglas since he was available in the States, but that doesn't change the fact that nowadays you'll be hard pressed to come across one online. Most listings feature the twins have a Tomy Ben but a Trackmaster Bill. The Tomy Bill is super rare, and it's only fitting that he finds himself up there next to Douglas as our second ultra rare model.
Ben.
The similarities between the Scottish and Corey twins don't stop there, not just because one is extremely rare, but because the other is relatively common. Ben, as just stated, is readily available online. Ben was probably the hardest to rank as he's another one who finds himself between 2 tiers. I was originally going to put him in uncommon just because of how he's really available online and he's extremely cheap. However, he isn't usually found in lots, and I don't think he's easily as found as Henry, Duck, or Diesel. Therefore, Ben is found right alongside Donald in the hard to find tier.
Boko.
Another fan favorite who wasn't produced a whole lot, Boko is our next engine. He's another one who I've wanted for a while, but because of how expensive he is and he's not that easy to find in good condition, I've never gotten around to it. Boko is like Stepney. It's really hard to differentiate whether he's Tomy or Trackmaster. You'll find a lot of listings of Boko online, but many of them are, in fact, Trackmasters. The elusive Tomy Boko, in my opinion, actually finds himself up next to Oliver in our rare tier.
Mavis.
Mavis is our last engine who was introduced in the classic series that we're covering today, but we do have a couple more after her. Unfortunately, Mavis is probably the least sought after Tomy model. There are tons of her sitting on the market right now, and I was originally going to put her in the common tier just because of how many listings are of her. However, after thinking about it and just considering how many collections and lots there are that just don't feature her, I think I have to just put her in the uncommon tier. However, if you are looking to start a collection on a budget, she's a great starter engine.
Diesel 10.
The first of our Magic Railway engines, Diesel 10 is certainly the most common of the three. He was definitely the most popular back in the day, and therefore, Tomy made sure to make a bunch of his models. I do wish he came with the movable arm like the Talkin' Action one does, but I digress. He's comfortable in the uncommon tier, not the level of Thomas or James, but definitely not hard to find.
Splatter and Dodge.
I decided to combine the two because for all of Tomy's run, these two were always released together. I remember years ago thinking these guys are a lot rarer than they are, but nowadays I don't think they're on the same level as Oliver or Boko. Splatter and Dodge are pretty safe and hard to find. You won't find them in someone's lot, but they definitely do pop up online enough.
Lady.
The final engine of today, Lady, is pretty similar to Splatter and Dodge. She does come with the coolest variants of the troublesome trucks in my opinion. They're her same color with those golden buffers. They've been on my wanted list for a while. Back to Lady though, she was definitely mass produced with the release of Thomas and the Magic Railway. Nowadays though, I think she's on the same level as Splatter and Dodge. You can definitely get her, but you're not going to find her sitting a lot or an average collection. Lady is our final engine, and she finds herself in the hard to find tier. Well guys, here is our final list. The definitive Tomy Thomas rarity tier list. Did I get something wrong? Am I a genius? Should I stop making videos? Let me know down in the comment section. Oh yeah, and big thanks to the Oliver fan for doing the character slides. He probably makes better videos than me, so go check the guy out. That's all for me for now though. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.